Seals his We're following some breaking news out of the White House. The Secret Service says a car hit the gate of the White House. The Secret Service, though, says it did not get through the car, through the barriers in front of the White House. A female driver has been apprehended. You may have noticed I didn't say if it's the north, south, east, or west side. We know very little at this point. But we do know, just because it's been that way for many years, that cars are not generally able to reach the perimeter gates of the White House, certainly not by the North Lawn, where for many years they've been closed off, I believe going back to the Clinton administration. And there are barricades that raise and lower, allowing certain cars to go near that North Lawn. And that's where the public is able to get closest to the West Wing of the White House. It's the spot where you see television reporters stand out in front of the building. And it's where tourists most often go because they can get the best look at the building. Back in 2012, after a high-profile fence jumper scaled the White House fence and made it all the way into the building, they extended the perimeter where people can stand. Major Garrett, who spends a lot of time out on the North Lawn of the White House, joins us now on the phone. Major, what can you tell us? Because we know almost nothing.
Well, first of all, we should let our audience know that this vehicle was not anywhere close to the White House itself, not close to the North Lawn of the White House, not close to Pennsylvania Avenue. If you think about the White House and understand where its position is in Washington, D.C., this would be about 2 blocks south of the White House itself, the exact intersection 17th Street and E Street, about a block south of the lower perimeter of the South Lawn of the White House, which anyone who's familiar with the geography of the White House knows that's a good distance from the White House itself and where I'm talking to you from right now. My booth here, the CBS booth, inside the area of the White House that separates the West Wing and the residence itself. A female driver hit a barrier at 17th and E. Secret Service immediately intervened, as it is trained to do. She was apprehended. There is no sign whatsoever that this was anything other than a one-vehicle incident, and that the incident has been resolved in terms of the driver being apprehended. There is a secondary investigation going on just to see if anything else is associated with this particular traffic accident, which means for the time being, the Secret Service is redirecting traffic around the incident, 17th and E in Washington, D.C. And right now, the Secret Service, as you mentioned in the lead-in, verifies nothing was breached, no part of the perimeter was breached. And I have some experience, having covered the White House for many, many years. Sometimes vehicles just get confused. Drivers don't know where they are, and they bump and run into things. We don't know if it was accidental or intentional. What we do know is nothing other than a car striking a barrier occurred, and the driver, a female, was apprehended by the Secret Service. It does not appear to be, number one, an ongoing security situation, or two, anything more complex than one vehicle, one intersection, and one accident.
Yeah, 17th and E it's so far away from the building itself. The South Lawn is so much larger than the North Lawn that actually, if you just go 10 feet to your right side off of 17th Street, there are on summer weekdays people playing softball in a rec league, Washington, D.C. league. That's a barrier that's really relatively not just far from the White House, but inaccessible because there aren't paths for cars. There's the lawn, the big lawn, and all the trees, as you say, Major.
So if you think about the geography of the White House, you have the South Lawn, you have the fence line beneath the South Lawn, and then there's a road that runs along that fence line that you can look into to the South Lawn grounds. That is this E Street. It used to be open to vehicle traffic. Several years ago, it was closed down, and these barriers were erected. Just south of that would be the Ellipse, the area where lots of tourists can walk around. And during the holiday season, that's where the National Christmas tree is. That's where the railroad track is. And all the other smaller trees that represent all the various states and territories of the United States. So that's part of the geography. So it is on the White House complex. Every single security incident necessarily raises alarms, and the Secret Service intervenes rapidly. That's exactly what happened here, consistent with every bit of training the Secret Service does. But for the moment, this does not appear to be an ongoing situation. The reason I say that with complete confidence is about 15 minutes ago, we had one of our producers who, like me, was in the East Room of the White House for the press conference President Trump had with the Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. We were making our way back. I got back to my White House booth, but one of my producers was lagging behind to take care of some technical issues. And when this vehicle accident occurred, the White House went into a brief period where everything was sort of locked down and no one was allowed to move. That was cleared within 3 or 4 minutes. The producer came. She's already left the booth. So there is a sense where I'm at that the reaction, again, consistent with training, was to lock everything down, find out what was going on. Then that lockdown period was rapidly ended, and now there's just what appears to be a rather ordinary post-accident investigation going on now.
Okay, Major, thank you. We're following the U.S. Secret Service Twitter page, which is giving us some useful updates at this hour, and they wrote just a few minutes ago, no law enforcement personnel were injured during the incident involving a vehicle hitting a barrier near the White House. Alicia Amling is a CBS News producer down in D.C. and joins us from outside of the White House. Alicia, what are you seeing?
So I'm that producer who was locked inside by the paint room and the florist shop in the basement of the White House. And I did exit the booth, tried to walk around the perimeter of the White House to see if we could see anything. Because from the North Lawn area, which is where you see Major and Margaret and Chip standing up doing stand-ups, it all seems calm and normal. They're preparing for the departure of the Australian Prime Minister. And we've been in lockdowns before where you can't actually exit the briefing room and you're kind of really stuck inside, and that is not the case. Mm-hmm. Everyone is very calm. Outside, there's a very wide perimeter. As Major said, this is pretty standard. It does seem a bit larger than normal, and I am currently hoofing my way from 17th and G, trying to make my way around the backside of the EEOB. That's the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, the really pretty building next to the White House, which is apparently rumor among the photojournalists has it that is where this intrusion or this incident happened, and it is a wide perimeter. So
at G or at E?
I am at 17th and G, where you can see only an empty road with some police cars 2 blocks down and a lot of police tape. So,
okay. And are you able to work your way down 17th?
No, 17th is closed, so you've got to go at least 2 blocks around. I'm trying to work my way around these big buildings and these big Washington blocks to see if I see anything closer to the back of campus. But from 17th and G, and I've looked at some colleagues, our journalists, photojournalists who have big lenses, they can't see anything down 17th Street either, besides the flashing lights of a couple of police cars. And we had one big siren go by, but if you've been in Washington during an incident before, you can hear a lot of sirens. So this feels relatively calm. I was at the Capitol building a few years back when a woman ran into the barricades on the Capitol complex, and it was a very sad incident. And that situation felt a little more hectic than this feels. So I don't know if they learned their lesson about these kinds of intrusions, or if it was maybe perhaps going at a lower speed and seems more like an accident. But it feels calmer than the Capitol complex did a few years back when something similar happened. And obviously we have no guidance from the Secret Service on the driver of the car, besides, I believe, that tweet that said it was a female.
Yeah.
So, but no law enforcement personnel injured. And just 1 block away at 18th and G, traffic is flowing normally. There's no police presence. So the rest of the city, unless you happen to be on 17th Street or in the White House, you don't seem to know what's going on.
I say this cautiously, and the control room will help me out if they can, but I believe the picture we're seeing is looking south on 17th Street, and that exit we see, that right-hand turn lane, would be the turn onto New York Avenue, which would make the next crossing street E. So if I'm right, we can't see much going on at E, but I may not be correct. Alicia, you said there's a wide perimeter. Do you know how far it goes? Is 18th closed off?
So 18th is not closed off. I am walking on 18th now, crossing F, just to try and trying to make my way back to that 17th and E corner, and 18th has a normal 4 o'clock traffic flow on a Friday, so traffic is moving pretty normally. There is a police presence at the corner of 18th and F, and there's one van with an officer leaning casually on the van, blocking the street. So you can't go down 18th and F, which would take you kind of into the side of the White House, but you can drive on 18th Street normally and walk just normally.
Okay, mostly good news coming out of Washington at this hour. Alicia Amling, thanks for joining us on the phone. We're going to get another phone connection with CBSN political contributor and AP White House reporter Zeke Miller. Zeke, where are you? What can you see? What do you know?
I'm here in the White House press workspace. I was on my way back to the press office when they shut the door in my face because they were entering a lockdown.
Mm-hmm. And is that ongoing, or has it relaxed at all?
They've definitely relaxed from where they were in that initial moment, but it is still restricted access around here. But that's also because the president's supposed to be seeing off Prime Minister Turnbull, the Australian Prime Minister, who was here during the incident in just a few moments. Okay,
and I mean, what can you tell us about the incident?
The Secret Service has put out a few statements on Twitter saying a vehicle rammed into a barrier at 17th and E. The female driver was apprehended, and that no shots were fired during the incident. So there were some initial reports that maybe there were shots fired. That according to the Secret Service, it's false. There were no shots fired during that incident near the White House.
Okay, and in terms of just the level of lockdown, the response, what else can you tell us about what you're seeing?
There was certainly a bit of scrambling among both security personnel, reporters and staffers trying to figure out what's going on. Those situations are always a little bit chaotic, but at the same time, they're also somewhat routine here. There are lockdowns that happen frequently. There are always security incidents at a building like the White House. They happen. They're not always, when something like this happens, it's often not intentional. Somebody left a bag across the street in the park, or and that they have to investigate. So there was certainly a bit of scrambling, but as you know, it's one of those things where we all think that it could be the worst sometimes, but more often than not, and everyone sort of reacts as if it could be, but 99 times out of 100, it's something routine, or somebody made a mistake or something like that. So we'll see where this investigation goes. But so far, things seem to be relaxing over here at the White House.
Okay, Zeke, thanks so much. As you look at the right side of your screen, of course, that's a picture of the White House, and you can see a couple what look like Secret Service folks on the roof. That's not uncommon, and they're looking toward what would be the South Lawn. The South Lawn is the part we can't see. We can see the North Lawn, and then you see that little piece of the Washington Monument on the right, the South Lawn just in between those two. Mola Lenghi, I believe, is on the North Lawn. Mola, are you there? I'm sorry, but we're going to have Mola Lenghi hopefully in a second. Zeke, are you still with us? Terrific. I feel like I've asked all the questions I have, so tell me what else are you thinking and seeing, and this is what I want to know. Has the press office said anything about what they're going to tell us next? Is there going to be a briefing? When are we getting more information?
They have not said what to expect next, but generally after this we'll usually get a statement from them just explaining what happened. Obviously, now that the president and the prime minister have had all this extra time together, do they have any other discussions? Well, do they use this opportunity, these talks, to sort of have any other to further on their bilateral conversations? I think we'll get some basic statement about what the president was doing during this situation. But because it's an unusual situation of there being a foreign leader there at the same time, maybe they were able to accomplish some business during the situation as well.
Okay, Zeke, let's reset things just for a little bit here. The first tweet from the U.S. Secret Service was right around 3:30 this afternoon Eastern time, and they wrote, "Breaking, an individual driving a passenger vehicle struck a security barrier near the White House at 17th and E." As we've reported, that's basically the southwest corner of the White House complex, and it's the part of the complex proper that's farthest away from the building itself. They've since detailed the fact that there were no security folks hurt, and there were no shots fired during the what they describe as a female driver driving a vehicle into the perimeter of the White House complex. Major Garrett and Zeke Miller, who are both inside the press area of the White House, have told us that after an initial lockdown, things have calmed down in the complex, and unlike other events where there's a fence jumper or some type of other concern or intrusion, the kind of full lockdown where you can't get in or out of the complex complex has not been happening since just the first few minutes after the reports of this, as I say, about 3:30 this afternoon. And so we're looking at a couple pictures, one of the outside, one of the security perimeters of the White House in the big box on the left side of your screen, and then on the right side, that familiar shot of the White House with the Washington Monument and National Mall behind it. Zeke, we've had fence jumpers over the years. Some of them make big news, some we never hear about. We have cars that now and again, as Major says, sometimes just get confused in the traffic pattern. In some cases, there's malicious intent. Overall, how unusual would you describe this, and how does this one fit in with some of the others you've seen?
Security incidents in the White House are, as said earlier, some of them a fairly routine occurrence. Secret Service is very prepared, and this seems to be one of those instances. Unlike in the past case where people have jumped over the fence and made it into the White House residence, this is one of those situations where the systems seem to have worked, and obviously there'll be a formal investigation there. But this vehicle did not breach the White House perimeter. The individual, the driver, was immediately apprehended by the Secret Service. So that seems to be an indication that the system was working. If you recall, a few years ago, there was an incident on the opposite side of the White House complex, the southeast side, where a driver rammed the barricades and then drove all the way over to the Capitol, maybe 4 years or so ago now. There was sort of a high-speed chase along Pennsylvania Avenue. This wasn't one of those situations. This one ended almost as quickly as it began.
And I assume we know nothing about the age, the registration of the car, all those details we do not know at this point?
We don't know those yet. We haven't been able to get over to that side of the complex yet. All we know is from the Secret Service that the driver of the vehicle was female and was immediately apprehended.
Okay. Zeke Miller, thanks. We're standing by basically to get more details and to get more perspective on what people saw. Very often in cases like this, because it's a highly trafficked tourist area, someone will have had their camera out taking video of the scene. There's also a considerable amount of security cameras in the area. Now, that does not mean we'll ever see them. We have the television networks, of course, have this shot that looks so familiar of the North Lawn. But in the case of that much publicized fence jumper, which initially the Secret Service says was tackled in the door, and then only after a Washington Post investigation did we learn that they made it all the way into the inside of the White House. In that case, we never saw the true security footage of the event. So we do not know exactly what we will see of this car, but we do know that there is a lot of human and electronic surveillance around this complex, not surprisingly. A complex that has expanded both in how large it restricts the public and in the manner in which it restricts the public. We just quickly saw the sign that said East Street. So we're looking at East Street and what I believe to be the eastern part of the complex, where we understand the crash happened on the western side. But based on, again, it's hard. I haven't lived there in a couple years. I'm trying to guess my way through exactly what we're seeing. But we're seeing the edge of the White House complex. There you now look into the complex. That's where visitors who are getting tours wait in line right by that barricade each morning to go in and get their tour of the White House. And we saw just a second ago, there's pedestrian traffic outside the White House. So what could have been, and what at first sounded like it may be a really terrible incident, so far sounds like there was minimal damage both to property and people. No security personnel, according to the Secret Service, were injured, and no shots were fired. But obviously, it's at the White House. It's someone driving a vehicle into a gate, and so there's concern about what the motive may have been, how it all came to be. Major Garrett suggested that, sometimes these traffic patterns just confuse people, but usually when you're confused by a traffic pattern, you don't end up in a fence. Okay, as we come up on the top of the hour, what we're looking at is what we've been looking at for 20-plus minutes here, the aftermath of a car incident around 3:30, probably just before 3:30 Washington time, in the E Street and 17th Street intersection of the White House complex. And as we've shown you previously on the map, that's basically the southwest corner of the White House complex, and it's the portion of the complex that's furthest away from the White House itself. It's really the lower left-hand corner intersection of what you're looking at on your screen. At the north lawn of the White House, where White House reporters hang out, is Mola Lenghi, who now joins us. And Mola, what are you seeing and what have you seen?
Well, good afternoon, Brooke. Yeah, we're in the north, on the north lawn here. The north side of the White House is typically where the reporters hang out. Today is a little different because we've got foreign media here as well, the Australian media, who are here with Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull on his visit. He is still in the West Wing of the Oval Office with the President. So we've got, yes, what are we seeing? We've got a lot of bodies, a lot of people around here, more than we typically have. And you know, the shuttle bus to pick them up, to pick the media up, came in about 20 minutes ago, right before the lockdown. And the folks are still sitting in the North Lawn driveway here waiting to board that bus so they can exit. And obviously the Prime Minister is also still inside the West Wing, presumably waiting to leave as well. You know, they had the presser about an hour ago, and typically right after that press conference, the Prime Ministers will usually take off. So it's sort of holding everything up for the Australian Prime Minister and the media. We're not really seeing the effects, aside from just being locked down, of the accident, of the breach, the security breach. It's in an area that we can't actually see from where we are here on the North Lawn, but we are getting the reports, obviously, and seeing exactly what you're seeing.
Okay, CBS News is able to report some of the details as they trickle in from law enforcement sources. We can now report that a law enforcement source tells us the woman intentionally drove the vehicle into the barricade, and that she was in the Secret Service's words, she was someone known to the Secret Service. They also say she was not local, that she was an out-of-state resident who is currently being interviewed by the Secret Service. So no motive, but we now know that the Secret Service says this is a person that they have had contact with in the past, and they believe intentionally drove her vehicle into that White House gate. Which, Mola, I think makes it all the more remarkable that you're describing a scene that is not that different than an ordinary Friday afternoon on the North Lawn of the White House.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I will, you know, talk to the point of the Secret Service perhaps knowing this individual. You know, threats are made all the time. The Secret Service is constantly sort of sifting through threats. We've seen incidents before, White House fence jumpers, folks coming in from out of town who, hop the fence, were wanting to do, oftentimes their motives were unclear what they were trying to do once they hopped the fence. But, coming to Washington, carrying out some sort of threat, carrying out some presumed sort of attack or again, unclear of the motives. But we've seen these sort of things where people come to Washington, come to the nation's capital, and these sort of things happen. So it wouldn't be unusual for someone to necessarily be on the Secret Service radar, but it doesn't typically get to the extent of actually breaching security, hopping a fence, ramming into a barrier with a vehicle, as we saw play out today.
And there it is, the vehicle that caused all this. It appears to be a minivan. It looks like a Chevy. I can't tell the plate and won't speculate at it, but since it's now in public view, I'm sure we'll get reporting on that real soon. And since folks have research abilities to run the plates, I'm sure we'll know who the car is registered to in short order as well. We can see that the back windshield is blown out. We're told no shots were fired, so presumably it was not shot out. The Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, who had a joint press conference with the President 2 hours ago, is now leaving the North Lawn just behind Mola. I think he'll go over Mola's shoulder in just a minute. So he's leaving through, as I said, the north gate of the White House, perhaps held up since that press conference ended now over an hour and 15 minutes ago. Perhaps he got a little more face time with the President, but a sign that the Secret Service isn't that concerned about the current situation, given that a head of state is now leaving the White House grounds. The Secret Service, we understand, is conducting the investigation into the crash of that vehicle. The FBI monitoring the case, but the Secret Service, which has been embattled over the years because of their their response and treatment of some of these White House incursions. They'll lead the investigation, at least for now. Mola, what else you got?
Well, the Prime Minister, as I'm not sure if you saw over my shoulder, he was able to just take off, as well as that shuttle bus with the foreign media. So slowly but surely, things seem to be returning back to normal here. As you said, Brooke, Secret Service feeling comfortable enough to at least reopen the North Lawn security checkpoint, which is just around the corner from the breached security checkpoint. So we're not too far away, but again, feeling comfortable enough to be able to reopen that checkpoint back up. But as you mentioned, the Prime Minister got about 30, 40 extra minutes with the President, so I'd be curious to see what they were discussing there for those extra 40 minutes.
Okay, Mola, thanks so much. Okay, now joining us on the phone is CBS News senior investigative producer Pat Milton. She's the one that so quickly comes into our email boxes with details of things as they unfold, and has already sent around some reporting on what she's learned from law enforcement. Pat, what do you know?
Yes, law enforcement sources are telling us that the woman is believed to have intentionally rammed the barricade. They said the woman is known to U.S. Secret Service, and she's described as someone who lives out of state, not a local resident. And Secret Service are conducting the investigation and are interviewing her currently.
Okay, and do we know what the next questions they're asking, or anything more about this woman or the circumstances of it?
Well, I think right now it's unclear what her motive was, but they are saying that it appears that she intentionally rammed the barricade with her vehicle.
Okay, and we've now seen, sadly, so many of these. What are the next questions you're trying to get answered as we sort through this?
I think the major question is why. I don't know whether it was a political statement, whether she had emotional problems. I don't know what the issues were, but they're trying to dig in and find out what happened here.
Yeah, and it won't be lost on some people on a day where we're talking about the president proposed gun restrictions on folks with mental health issues, that here's another case, as gun rights supporters have pointed out, that there are other types of weapons that both the mentally well and unwell can use. And in this case, that appears to be what happened. Do you have any sense, Pat, on timing of when some of these next questions, are these things you expect to know the answer of this afternoon, or do you think we're going to be waiting for an investigation for days or weeks?
No, I think Secret Service is, such a pro at this, and I'm sure that they'll be getting to the bottom of it and be letting us know via Twitter or via our law enforcement sources as to what has happened.
And maybe it's obvious, but maybe it's not. What are the main tools at their disposal that they're going to look to as they conduct this investigation?
Well, I mean, the main thing right now is that they have her, and that they're sitting there and talking to her and trying to get information out of her. We know that, there were no shots fired, and thank goodness there was no law enforcement injured, or no bystanders or the members of the public that were injured.
For sure. Pat Milton, thanks so much.